The gavel cracked like a rifle shot across the dusty street of Laramie City, and every man in the territory knew the woman chained to the hitching post outside the Golden Spike Saloon was about to be sold to the devil who bid highest. It was the 23rd of June, 1877, and the wind that usually came screaming off the Laramie Range at 30 miles an hour had died at sunrise. Not a breath stirred. The Union Pacific locomotive idling on the siding sat silent, its smokestack drooping straight up into a sky the color of heated brass. Heat shimmered off the rails. The smell of creosote and horse sweat hung thick enough to chew. Folks said when the wind quit like that, somebody important was going to die. Folks were rarely wrong. The woman stood barefoot in the red dirt, ankles hobbled with iron traced in rust the color of old blood, wrists lashed behind her back with rawhide gone stiff from 3 days of sweat. A burlap sack had been yanked down over her head so that only her mouth showed lips split, crusted with salt and sun. A hand-lettered placard hung from her neck on binder twine. Property of the territory of Wyoming, to be sold at public auction for crimes against the peace. The auctioneer was a greasy little man named Pike who wore a derby 2 sizes too small and smelled of bay rum and fear. He strutted back and forth on an overturned crate, waving a dog-eared warrant like a sideshow barker. "Step right up, gentlemen." One female, white, approximately 30 years of age, sound in wind and limb, guilty of horse theft, assault upon a deputy United States Marshal, and suspicion of murder in the 1st degree. No kin have come forward. Territory offers her for private sale to any man willing to assume full responsibility for her past, present, and future behavior. Starting bid $100 cash or equivalent in livestock. A low laugh rumbled through the crowd. Cowboys, drifters, soldiers on leave from Fort Laramie, a handful of hard-faced ranchers who'd ridden in just to watch the spectacle. $100 was a year's wages for most. Nobody moved. Pike mopped his forehead with a red bandana. "75 then. Come on, boys, she's got all her teeth." Still nothing but the creak of saddle leather and the nervous stamp of horses tied. Along the rail. At $50 a drunk mule skinner in a wool cap started forward, fumbling with a poke of dust. The woman under the sack hadn't made a sound, not a whimper, not a curse. Nothing since they dragged her out of the jail wagon at dawn. The mule skinner got 3 steps before a voice cut across the street. Like a whip through cold air. 60. Every. Head swiveled. The speaker stood half in shadow on the boarded sidewalk in front of the land office. One boot heel hooked on the lower step, thumbs tucked into a cartridge belt gone pale with alkali dust. Caleb McKenna was 36, raw-boned and tall, with a face burned the color of saddle leather and a scar that started at his left ear and hooked down to the corner of his mouth. Comanche lance. Chancellorsville, 1865. He wore no coat despite the heat. Only a sweat-stained hickory shirt rolled to the elbows and a Colt Navy converted to cartridges riding low on his right hip. Men gave him room without thinking about it. He owned the Bar M 30 miles north up the Chugwater Road. A hard-scrabble outfit he'd scratched out of the grass after the war left him with nothing but a limp. A Henry rifle and a talent for not dying when he probably should have. Pike's eyes glittered. $60 to McKenna. Do I hear 65? The mule skinner spat a stream of tobacco juice and melted back into the crowd. 60 going once. 75. A new voice called. Lazy and amused. Wade Cutler stepped out from the batwing doors of the Golden Spike, thumbs hooked in the armholes of a brocade vest the color of dried blood. Cutler owned the broken bow spread and half the judges in the territory. He was built like a beer barrel with legs, and the 2 gunmen who drifted out behind him wore their holsters tied down. Caleb didn't even glance at Cutler. 100. A collective intake of breath. $100 was more money than most men in the street had ever seen in one place. Cutler's smile thinned. $150. Pike was practically dancing. $150 to Mr. Cutler. Do I hear $200? Caleb said, voice flat. The crowd went dead quiet. Somewhere a horse snorted and pawed the dirt. Cutler's face darkened. You fixing to die over a murderess, McKenna? I'm fixing to finish this, Caleb answered. Pike looked from one man to the other, sweat shining on his upper lip. 200 once, twice any advance? His gavel hovered. Sold. To Caleb McKenna for $200 American. A low mutter rippled outward. $200 for a woman the territory couldn't hang fast enough. McKenna had gone clean crazy. Caleb stepped down into the street. The sun hammered his shoulders. Heat boiled up through the solace of his boots. He walked straight to the hitching post, paid Pike in crisp greenbacks fresh from the Denver mint, and took hold of the rawhide leash the little man offered like a carnival prize. Only then did he reach up and pull the burlap sack from her head. The world stopped. Filth and bruises couldn't hide the high cheekbones, the stubborn set of the jaw, the storm-gray eyes ringed with exhaustion and defiance. A thin scar cut through her left eyebrow like a lightning bolt frozen in flesh. Caleb felt the street tilt under him, felt every scar on his body open and bleed at once. Evia? The name came out cracked and broken, a word he hadn't spoken aloud in 13 years. Her cracked lips shaped a single word. So low only he heard it above the sudden roar in his ears. Run. Behind him. Wade Cutler's laugh rolled out slow and ugly. Well now, looks like McKenna just bought himself a dead woman walking. Caleb didn't turn. Couldn't. All he could do was stare at Evangeline Shaw, 14 years old, the night Quantrill's raiders burned Lawrence, Kansas, and left nothing but ashes and bones. He had dug her grave himself with a bayonet and a broken heart while the town still smoldered. He had cried over that grave until there was nothing left inside him but smoke. Yet here she stood, 30 years old, sunburned, bloody, and alive. Her eyes flicked past him to Cutler, to the gunman, to the crowd waiting for blood or sport. Then back to Caleb. Something raw and desperate moved behind the gray. I said run, she whispered again. Hoarse as a crow. Caleb's hand settled on the butt of his Colt. The street smelled of hot iron and fear. Somewhere a horse whickered, sensing thunder though the sky was cloudless. He took one step closer, close enough to smell the jail stink on her, close enough to see the pulse hammering at the base of her throat. I'm not running, he said, low enough for her ears alone. Not this time. Her mouth twisted half snarl, half something that might once have been a smile. Then God help us both, she said. Behind them. Wade Cutler spat into the dust and started forward, hand dropping toward his holster. The wind still hadn't come back, and the day was far from over. They left Laramie before the town had finished licking its wounds. Caleb on the big claybank gelding and Evangeline riding double behind him, wrist still raw from the rawhide but no longer bound. The leash lay coiled in his saddlebag like a dead snake. The sun hung low and bloody, and the wind that had been dead all day now came back in hot, spiteful gusts that slapped dust against their faces. Caleb pushed the horse hard, following no road, only the faint wagon traces that ran north along the Chugwater. Behind them, the smoke of Laramie thinned to nothing. Ahead lay 30 miles of open grass and the Barham. He did not speak. Neither did she. The only sounds were hoofbeats, leather creaking, and the low moan of wind through the sage. Night dropped sudden and complete. He made cold camp in a cottonwood grove beside the Little Laramie River, no fire, because every bounty hunter between the Platte and the Sweetwater would be watching for smoke. He unsaddled, rubbed the claybank down with a fistful of grass, then turned to the woman who sat on a fallen log with her knees drawn up and her torn dress clutched around her like a shroud. He offered the canteen first. She drank deep, throat working, water spilling down her chin and cutting pale trails through the grime. When she lowered it, her eyes never left his face. "You were dead," he said at last, voice rough as river stone. "I was 14, she answered, hoarse from 3 days without proper water. Small for my age. Ma always said I looked 10. When Quantrill's men set the house alight, I crawled under the floorboards with the dog. Roof fell in. Everybody figured we burned." She touched the thin scar that cut through her left eyebrow like a lightning bolt. "Dog didn't make it. Roof pinned him. I dug out through the ashes 3 nights later." The words hung between them heavier than the darkness. Caleb sat on his heels, elbows on his knees. "I dug that grave myself. Bayonet and my bare hands. Buried what I thought was you in a little cedar box." "I know," she said softly. "I watched from the cottonwoods. Couldn't make my legs move to come to you. You were crying so hard I thought it would kill you." Silence again, thick enough to choke on. He cleared his throat. "All these years the Dodgers said Esau, female, approximately 30, extremely dangerous. Horse theft, assault, suspicion of murder. That was you?" She gave a laugh that held no mirth at all. "They hanged the wrong woman in Cheyenne last spring. She had a brand on her shoulder looked something like mine. I let them do it. One less hunter on my trail." Caleb stared at her across 6 feet of starlit darkness. The girl he had loved like a sister, the girl he had mourned every drunken night for a solid year after the war, sat alive and breathing and wanted for more blood than most men ever spilled. "Why horses?" he asked. "Why not just vanish clean?" "Because disappearing costs money, Caleb, and the only thing I ever learned to do better than run was take what I needed." She lifted her chin. "I never killed a man who didn't draw first. That's more than most can say in this territory." A coyote yipped upriver. An owl asked its eternal question and received no answer. He moved without thinking, knelt in front of her, and drew his skinning knife. The blade flashed once in the starlight as he sliced the last rawhide from her wrists. She rubbed the circulation back, watching him with those storm-gray eyes that had once belonged to a child begging him to push her higher on the rope swing behind the Lawrence schoolhouse. "What happens now?" she asked. "You ride with me to the barn. After that?" He stopped. There was no after that. A man doesn't buy his own ghost for $200 and simply send her on her way. She studied him for a long moment. "You always were too soft for this country, Caleb McKenna. And you were always too hard, Evangeline Shaw." She rose in one fluid motion, stepped close enough that he smelled jail stink and river water and something underneath that was still her, and kissed him once, hard, brief, tasting of blood and desperation. "That's for burying me proper," she whispered against his mouth. "Don't expect another." Then she walked to the claybank, caught the reins, and swung up bareback, though the prison dress was shredded to the thigh and her legs were bruised black and purple. She looked down at him from the saddle, moonlight silver on her cheekbones. "Coming husband?" The word hit him square in the chest like a .44 slug. He mounted behind her, felt her body settle back against his as natural as breathing, and turned the gelding north. They rode through the night, 2 shadows stitched together by starlight and old grief. 3 dawns later they came down off the ridge into the bowl where the barn lay. Longhorns scattered before them like red leaves in a storm. The ranch was raw and honest. Low log house with a sod roof, pole corrals, a windmill creaking over a well that tasted of iron and bitterness. 2 men stepped out of the bunkhouse with rifles. Jesus, 60 and tough as wang leather, and young Tommy 3 Trees half Shoshone, quick as a cat. Jesus lowered his Winchester first. "Patron, you bring home a wife or a prisoner?" "Both," Caleb said, swinging down. "And neither." He reached up and lifted Evangeline from the saddle. Her bare feet touched the dirt and she swayed, but pride kept her upright. Tommy's mouth fell open. "Sweet Jesus and Mary." "Coffee first," Evangeline said, voice still rough. Then explanations. Inside the house she bathed in a tin tub while Caleb burned the prison dress in the cook stove until nothing remained but greasy ash. He dug out a pair of his dead wife's buckskin trousers and a faded blue calico shirt. The trousers were too short, the shirt too tight across the shoulders, but she rolled the sleeves and looked more dangerous than any woman in silken lace had ever managed. That night a storm rolled down from the mountains, black clouds swallowing the stars. Rain hammered the shake roof like thrown gravel. Caleb sat at the table cleaning his Henry while Evangeline sharpened the skinning knife. She had lifted from his wall without asking. "We've got trouble coming," she said suddenly, testing the edge against her thumb. A bead of blood welled bright. "I know. Marshall will ride out soon as he hears who bought you." "Not the Marshal." She met his eyes. "Wade Cutler." The name dropped between them like a loaded shotgun. Cutler ran the Broken Bow. 30 hard cases on payroll and had been pushing Caleb off his range for 2 solid years. Rumor said Cutler paid bounty hunters to drag in any woman, matching Evangeline's description because 5 years ago she had killed his younger brother in Abilene after the boy tried to collect the price on her head. "He'll burn the place to get me," she said. "Let him come." She looked at him then, really looked, and something ancient and wounded moved behind her eyes. "You'd die for a ghost?" "I already did once," he said. "Didn't take." The rain hammered harder. Lightning clawed the sky, and for one white instant her face was lit. Scar, storm-gray eyes, mouth set like a blade. 2 nights later, under a moon thin as a razor blade, Wade Cutler came with 20 riders and torches. They fired the barn first. Flames roared up orange and hungry, painting the night the color of hell. Caleb, Jesus, and Tommy met them in the yard with rifles and shotguns singing. Evangeline stood on the porch in the dead woman's clothes, a Spencer carbine steady against her shoulder, picking off riders with the calm of a woman shelling peas. Cutler himself charged the house on a huge black stallion, hair coat flying, roaring Caleb's name like a curse. Caleb stepped into the mud to meet him. Henry raised, but the shot that dropped Wade Cutler came from the porch. Evangeline walked forward through smoke and rain, working the Spencer's lever, and put one more round into Cutler's chest when he tried to rise. The Broken Bow men broke and ran, leaving their dead in the mud dot when the gunfire stopped. The barn was ash. 2 horses lay screaming until Jesus silenced them, and Wade Cutler stared at the sky with permanent surprise frozen on his face. Evangeline stood over the body, smoke curling from her barrel. "You shouldn't have done that," Caleb said quietly. Rain streaming off his hat brim. "I just saved your life. You just put the price on both our heads 10 times higher." She turned to him, rain beating on her lashes like tears she would never shed. "Then we'd better start running together," she said. Lightning flashed again. In that white instant he saw her clearly, beautiful, terrible, alive, and knew he would follow her straight into hell if she asked. He reached out, brushed a strand of wet hair from her cheek. "Together," he said. Behind them the barn collapsed in a roar of sparks, and the rain kept falling, washing blood into the Wyoming dirt. The rain quit an hour before dawn, leaving the barn yard a stinking stew of mud, blood, and burnt pine. The barn was only blackened ribs now, glowing dull red whenever the wind shifted. Wade Cutler lay on his back in the churned earth, bare coat soaked black, eyes staring at a sky the color of a fresh bruise. 17 men had ridden in with him. 9 had ridden out. The rest were scattered like broken toys across the yard, some already stiff, some still leaking slow into the gumbo. Caleb stood barefoot on the porch. Shirt plastered to his skin, tin cup of coffee gone cold 2 hours ago. The air smelled of wet ash, horse fear, and the sweet copper stink of slaughter. A gut-shot Mare kept screaming until Jesus walked over, calm as Sunday, and put a Colt round behind her ear. The silence afterward felt heavier than the guns had been. Evangeline stepped out beside him, barefoot too, wearing the buckskin trousers and blue calico shirt now stiff with dried mud and powder smoke. The Spencer hung broken open across her forearm like a woman carrying kindling. Her hair hung in wet ropes to her waist. She looked at the ruin of the ranch the way a butcher looks at a side of beef. Calm, already deciding what could still be used. "We ride at full light," she said. Not a question. Caleb only nodded. He had known the minute Cutler hit the ground that the barm was finished. Jesus and Tommy worked by lantern light in the bunkhouse, faces gray. Jesus' hand shook as he rolled blankets. Tommy's cheek was split to the bone from a ricochet, but the boy only wiped blood on his sleeve and kept packing. Jesus stopped in the doorway, old eyes wet. "Patron, this place is all I got. Rosa is under the cottonwood by the creek." "I know, viejo. But dead men don't water cattle, and live ones can't fight the whole territory. Ride with us or stay and tell whatever story the law will swallow. Your call." Jesus crossed himself, spat, and went back to work. By sunrise they had 4 saddle horses and 2 packs ready. Gold from the cache under the floorboards, 40 pounds sewn into canvas. Jerky, coffee, sugar, ammunition, every greenback Caleb owned. They left the house standing open, stove still warm, coffee pot on the hearth like an invitation to ghosts. Evangeline swung up, on a rangy dun mare taken from one of Cutler's dead riders. She sat the saddle like she'd been born in it, Spencer across her thighs, eyes sweeping the horizon the way a hawk looks for motion. "North?" Caleb asked. "North," she said. "Past the Sweetwater, over South Pass, then wherever snow don't fall till Christmas." They rode out single file, Caleb on the claybank, Evangeline on the dun, Jesus on a hammerhead roan, Tommy trailing the pack string. They did not look back. Behind them buzzards were already dropping out of the sky. 10 days of hard riding carried them out of the grass and into the pine. They followed game trails and old trapper traces where no telegraph wire ran. Nights grew cold. They slept without fire when the moon was bright, ate pemmican and parched corn, spoke little. Frost silvered the grass each morning, and the peaks ahead were fresh white caps. On the 11th night they camped in a high park ringed by lodgepole. A small fire of dead aspen burned low so the light wouldn't carry. Jesus and Tommy slept 20 yards off, rolled tight in blankets like dead men. Evangeline sat cross-legged opposite Caleb, staring into the coals, turning the Spencer's lever slowly. Click-clack. Click-clack. She spoke without looking up. "After Lawrence I rode with what was left of Quantrill's boys for a season. Learned what men turn into when the rules burn. Then I rode alone. Abilene, Ellsworth, Dodge, every cow town had my picture. I took horses because they were fast and didn't ask questions. Took men when they forced my hand. Never took a child. Never took a woman. That's the only line I kept." She lifted her eyes then, storm gray in the firelight. Cutler's brother was 19. Thought $5,000 would buy him a ranch and a reputation. Cornered me behind the Lady Gay saloon with a Navy Colt and whiskey courage. I told him to walk away. He laughed. So I shot him twice in the body and once in the mouth so he'd stop. The fire popped. A coal rolled out. Caleb kicked it back. "And now the territory will pay $10,000 to see you swing. 10 alive. 15 dead. They like to make sure." She studied him across the flames. "I stopped believing in anything the night Lawrence burned. Until you paid $200 for a woman every other man spat on." He reached across the space between them, took the Spencer, laid it aside. Then he kissed her slow, deliberate, tasting pine smoke and old grief and something fierce that had waited 13 years. She kissed him back like a woman taking her first breath after drowning Dot when they broke apart. Her forehead rested against his. "No more running alone," she whispered. "Never again," he answered. Wolf howled far off. Another answered. The night smelled of snow coming. 3 weeks later they came down the western slope into the Green River country, 4 riders trailing 6 spare horses heavy with gold and winter. South Pass City was half ghost town, boards over windows, stamps silent. But the preacher and ex-Confederate named Holly, who drank rye for breakfast, was sober enough when Caleb slid a $20 gold piece across the scarred desk. They married at dusk in a log church that smelled of mice and candle wax. Evangeline wore a plain brown calico dress bought from a miner's widow for $3 and a side of venison. Caleb wore his one clean shirt and the coat he'd been married in the first time. Jesus stood witness. Tommy held the horses outside and grinned despite the scar pulling at his cheek. When Holly asked for a ring, Caleb drew a plain gold band from his vest pocket, the same ring he had bought for Sarah, dead of fever 8 years ago. It slid onto Evangeline's finger like it had waited for her all along. Hale's voice cracked on, "Till death do you part." But nobody laughed. That night they took the room above the assayer's office. Snow tapped the window like thrown rice. A coal oil lamp painted them gold. Evangeline stood in the middle of the floor, fingers on the buttons of the calico dress, eyes never leaving his. "I ain't gentle." Caleb, "Never learned how." "I ain't asking for gentle." The dress dropped. Moonlight striped her body scars, old bullet furrows, the pale brand on her left shoulder. She was beautiful the way a winter storm is beautiful. They came together hard and slow and reverent, learning each other with hands and mouths and whispered names long buried. When she cried out, it was his name, not God's. And he answered with hers like a prayer he'd forgotten he knew. Afterward they lay tangled under a Hudson's Bay blanket, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing the scar through her eyebrow. "I could get used to this," she said, soft, almost shy. "Being somebody's wife. You already are." Outside, snow fell thick and silent, covering their tracks. But the world has long arms. Dot in November. Marshal Garrett tall, lantern-jawed, never lost a prisoner picked up their sign outside Atlantic City with 6 hard deputies. Caught them at dawn in a narrow canyon rimed with ice. The fight was short and terrible. Tommy took the first bullet, high in the chest, and died without a sound. Jesus stood over the boy, roaring in Spanish, and killed 2 deputies before a shotgun charge folded him in half. Caleb and Evangeline fought back to back, Henry and Spencer singing, powder smoke mixing with their breath. Caleb took a .44 through the left shoulder, went to one knee. Evangeline levered until the Spencer clicked empty, then drew Caleb's Colt and kept killing. When the smoke cleared, Garrett sat against a boulder, leaking his life into the snow. 5 deputies dead around him. Garrett looked up, teeth red. 15,000. Dead or alive. Evangeline walked over and put the Colt to his forehead. "Tell the devil Esau sends her regards." The shot closed the gate. She turned back to Caleb, who was tying his neckerchief around the hole in his shoulder, face white as the snow. "Can you ride? Try and stop me." They buried Jesus and Tommy under stones where the wind would sing forever, took the best horses, and rode higher into country, no map named Dot behind them, the territory posted new dodgers. Evangeline Shaw and husband Caleb McKenna wanted for murder of federal officers $20,000 reward, but the snow fell thick and silent, and by spring no track remained. Years later trappers spoke of a hidden Valley above 10,000 feet where the elk grew fat and the aspen turned gold every October. A cabin stood there, smoke curling straight in thin air. A tall man with a limp and a woman with storm-gray eyes kept a garden, raised horses, and turned strangers away with quiet rifles, some said on still nights. You could hear her singing an old Kansas hymn to the wind, and no marshal ever found that valley. They rode out of the canyon with the smell of powder still clinging to their clothes and Marshal Garrett's blood already frozen pink on the snow behind them. Caleb's left arm hung useless, the bullet hole through the meat of his shoulder burning like a coal. Evangeline had tied it tight with her petticoat and his neckerchief, but every jolt of the claybank sent white fire down to his fingertips. They did not speak of stopping. There was no place left on the map that would take them. Snow came sideways on a wind that cut like a skinning knife. By noon the world was white and silent except for the creak of saddle leather and the labored breathing of horses climbing higher than any sane man had business going in November. They left the last wagon trace behind and followed a narrow Shoshone hunting trail that switchbacked up a ridge of broken granite. The pack animals slipped and scrambled. Once a lead rope snapped and 40 pounds of gold sledded 50 feet before lodging against a pine. Tommy's frozen body and Jesus's were already miles behind. Buried under stones no living hand would move again. At timberline the wind quit as suddenly as it had risen. Snow still fell, thick and straight, erasing their tracks almost before the horses lifted their hooves. Caleb swayed in the saddle. Fever sweat froze on his beard. Evangeline reined in, looked back. Her face was white beneath the sunburn, lips cracked and bleeding. There's a basin my Shoshone friend told me about once, she said. Hidden, grass even in winter, hot spring, ringed by cliffs. He called it Pa-Ko-T-V- place where the wind forgets. Said white men would never find it because the entrance moves with the snowdrifts. Caleb managed a cracked laugh. You believe in fairy stories now? I believe in staying alive, she said. We follow this ridge west till the third lightning-blasted pine, then drop north into nothing. If we don't find it, we die pretty and quiet. Better than a rope in Cheyenne. He looked at her a long moment, then nodded. They rode. The third pine was a blackened skeleton clutching at the sky. Beyond it, the mountain fell away into cloud. Evangeline took the lead, the Dunmare feeling her way along a shelf no wider than a wagon seat. Snow hid the edge. One misstep and horse and rider would drop 1,000 feet to rocks that never saw a sun. Caleb shut his eyes and let the claybank follow the Dun's tail. They rode blind for an hour, maybe two. Then the wind truly died and the snow thinned, and suddenly they were descending into a bowl of gold grass glowing under weak winter sun. Steam rose from a creek that cut the valley floor. Cottonwoods grew thick along the water, and elk grazed as tame as cattle. Ringed all around were red cliffs so sheer a man could not climb them with wings. Evangeline pulled up, stared, and for the first time since Laramie her shoulders shook with something that might have been laughter or tears. Pa-Ko-T-V, she whispered. They made camp that night beside the hot spring. Caleb's fever broke in the sulfur steam. He slept 2 days and woke weak but alive. Evangeline hunted elk with the Spencer and kept watch with the Henry across her knees. When he could stand again, they built. Winter passed in a blur of axe work and hunger and healing. They felled pine with a crosscut saw taken from a dead deputy's pack, notched logs, chinked with moss and mud. By spring a cabin stood small, tight, one room with a loft, stone fireplace big enough to stand in. They planted a garden in the black soil by the creek, potatoes, turnips, beans saved from the barham. They caught wild horses in a corral of woven willow and broke them gentle. The valley gave them everything but people, and people were the one thing they no longer wanted. Years, slid by like water. 1878 became 1880, then 1885. The territory became a state. Railroads stitched the plains. Cheyenne grew fat and respectable. New Dodgers went up for a while. Evangeline Shaw and Caleb McKenna. 20,000 reward, but snow and time and distance did their work. The paper yellowed, the ink faded. The marshals who remembered died of old age or whiskey or Apache arrows down south. In the hidden valley, the man with the limp and the woman with storm-gray eyes grew lean and hard and quietly content. They spoke little of the past. Some nights she woke screaming from dreams of fire and reached for him across the bearskin robe. He held her until the shaking stopped. Some mornings he woke before dawn and stood on the porch watching the elk graze, feeling the old ache in his shoulder and the newer one in his heart for Jesus and Tommy, and the boy he had been before the war. One spring in the year 1887 a stranger came. He was old, half crippled, riding a mule that looked ready for the boneyard. He found the drift snow entrance by pure accident or the hand of God and stumbled into the valley at dusk, leading the mule by a rope halter chewed to strings. Caleb met him at the lower meadow with the Henry across his saddle. Evangeline stood on the cabin porch, Spencer in her hands. Hair gone iron gray at the temples, but eyes still sharp as winter stars. The old man raised both empty hands. "I ain't here for blood nor bounty," he croaked. "Name's Pike. Used to auction folks in Laramie. Remember me?" Caleb's finger whitened on the trigger. Pike saw it and grinned toothlessly. "Easy, McKenna. I'm 70 if I'm a day and half dead already. Come to deliver something, then I'll ride out and trouble you no more." He reached slow into his coat and drew out a folded paper yellow with age. Held it out. Evangeline took it, unfolded it with fingers that did not shake. It was a full pardon, signed by the governor of the brand new state of Wyoming, witnessed and sealed. The charges against E. Shaw and Caleb McKenna were listed, then crossed out in red ink. Dismissed, insufficient evidence, interest of justice. Below, in a spidery hand, heard you was dead. Reckon some folks ought to stay that way. Burn this when read. Evangeline looked at Pike. "Why?" The old man shrugged. Wade Cutler had a sister in Cheyenne. Married a judge. She never believed her brother died clean. Kept pushing. Finally wore the governor down. But the judge is dead now, and the sister too, and nobody else much cares about two ghosts from before statehood. He spat pink. He was spitting blood, Caleb saw now. Besides, I still remember the day the wind stopped in Laramie. Figured a woman who could make the wind hold its breath deserved better than a rope. He turned the mule. "You'll not see another living soul," he said over his shoulder. "Valley's yours till you die." He rode out the way he came and never looked back. They found his body the next spring, frozen stiff at the foot of the drift. Mule long gone to coyotes. They burned the pardon in the fireplace and watched the flames eat 10 years of running. That night, for the first time in all their years together, Evangeline cried not from nightmares, but from something softer. Caleb held her the way he had held her through fire and lead and fever. And when the tears were done, he kissed the salt from her cheeks. In the morning they walked to the upper meadow where the wildflowers grew thick in June. Caleb carried a small cedar box he had carved over the winter. Inside lay the plain gold wedding band, worn thin now, and a lock of black hair turning silver. He dug a hole beneath a young aspen and buried the box. "What was that?" Evangeline asked. "The last of the running," he said. She took his hand scarred. Steady, warm, and together they walked home through grass as high as their knees. Elk watching from the tree line, sun warm on their backs. Behind them the aspen leaves shook in a wind that finally remembered how to blow. And in the hidden valley called Pakeo TV, Caleb and Evangeline McKenna lived out their days free two people who had once bought and sold death so often that life, when it finally came to them quiet and complete, tasted sweeter than any pardon a governor could sign. Every year on the anniversary of the day the wind stopped in Laramie, Caleb would take his wife's hand, look into those storm-gray eyes still sharp at 70, and whisper the same words, "Worth every damn penny." And she would smile the slow, rare smile that had once belonged to a 14-year-old girl on a rope swing in Kansas, and answer, "Still running, husband?" He would kiss her then, slow and certain. "Not anymore," he'd say. "We're home."